thanks to Bryan once again for an enlightening and I guess really thought-provoking presentation there. Who knows where we'll be at the end of the next decade, but I am certainly looking forward to the follow-up presentation to that one. So that's not all we'll hear from Bryan today. On stage one, he's up for a live discussion next with his good mate Adam Jacob, who is the former co-founder of Chef and now CEO of System Initiative. And I'm sure many of you know Chef and are familiar with that platform. For me, it really kicked off the whole infrastructure as code movement before I think that term even existed. So also with a very sharp mind and unwavering passion, we also have Ashley Williams, who is joining us today. Ashley is a former Rust Lane core team member, and she's now working on Axo, which among other things has some nifty crates to help distribute Rust binaries in different formats like MSI and Homebrew and what. So we also have so much good content today. I'm sorry, it's going to be really hard to decide once again. If you happen to miss this live discussion just about to queue up, then be sure to check out Stefan's presentation on stage 2. He's covering reducing latencies with generational ZGC, and also Tammy Everts has a great presentation on performance budgets to fight regressions. But let's get into the live discussion now, live on stage 1. Thank you very much, Bryan.
All right. Thank you very much. That was exciting. And I'm here with my two good mates, Ashley Williams and Adam Jacobs. Very, very excited. Thanks for joining me, you two. I think we all have some hot takes. And we've all had kind of a lot to think about over the last couple of years. Things have changed a lot, actually. And I think if we were to go back into a time machine a decade ago, I don't know that we would have predicted this particular outcome, that we got the large players. I think I'll throw it out there. I think that the large companies are behaving better than they were a decade ago. I think we've actually got, speaking as someone who's using a lot of open source generated from a lot of otherwise rapacious, capitalist, paperclip hungry companies, I feel like they're behaving a little better, and we've got some of these startups that I'm not sure about. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I would also say a big difference is the foundations are playing a really important role. And so, Ashley, let's start with you on kind of the foundation topic, because I didn't talk about foundations too much in this talk. We all have a complicated relationship with foundations, but I think it's becoming increasingly clear that we are looking to foundations to really give us open source that we can trust not to be relicensed. What do you think about the kind of the changing role in foundations and all this?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is, looking back a decade ago, I was just like a little baby, and I saw open source and I was like, oh my gosh, open source is the opposite of business, and I'm a little communist and I don't want to do business, so I want to do open source. So I feel like I'm coming at it from like a very different perspective. So to ask the question, like, are businesses behaving better in open source? I kind of have to be like, what behavior did we want? And like, what did we want to participate? And I know it's not answering your question about foundations, but I think that one of the questions here, and a thing that I kind of bemoan about open source, given baby Ashley dreams, is I think that businesses are behaving better in open source because they are participating in a lot more. And I know scarcity mindset, net zero is really bad, but I do think that we're seeing the participation in open source shift from people paid to do it as part of a business to, the random person in their garage who does it out of passion for doing it. I think as we see large business players emerge in open source, it's very valuable to have foundations, but the difference between a foundation and a big business is not much. But in some ways, you can think that a foundation can help prevent some type of kind of like a corporate takeover in some senses. But I
mean, like
a
singular corporate takeover.
Sure. Well, you're picking up what I'm putting down, Adam. So I don't disagree. But yeah, I think the idea of like a foundation prevents a relicense. I don't know. I don't see that as being true. Though I guess so far it hasn't happened.
Okay, if we see foundations, if we see the LF has a note to our community about how we are going to empower our youth, that just feel, I don't know, that would be, God, that's going to be the end of days. Adam, I don't know, what do you think about the?
I mean, I think large companies have gotten better at open source because they've figured out how to monetize on open source, particularly by building giant consortiums where they all decide for whatever reason. You know, the Linux Foundation, look at the CNCF, like that happened because Amazon was winning and everybody else was losing. They panicked a little and were like, what the hell are we going to do? And they were like, you know what we should do? We should all collaborate to try to build a platform that's big enough that the weight shifts toward something else so that then we can be more effective competitors against Amazon. And so you got Amazon, you got Microsoft, you got Google, you got Oracle, you got a bunch of people. Red Hat decided like, hey, let's all Kubernetes it up. We'll CNCF it. We put a bunch of money into it. And like that was a direct competitive hedge. That was them using open source as a weapon against a competitor very explicitly. Like if you look at Amazon, they participate a lot in those things, but like, you know, there was like a security thing. I forget exactly what the name of the council was or whatever, that like everybody was invited but Amazon, you know? And then at the very last minute, they were like, oh, I guess we better invite Amazon too. And it's like, right, because you didn't actually want Amazon there. Yeah, because it's a competitive weapon. So like they're behaving better because they figured out how to use that weapon in their rapacious best interest. It's not because they suddenly became enlightened and they were like, hey, you know what's great is that software is an infinite resource and it should be free and we're living our like communal dreams. That's not what happened at all. It's that there's like, hey, there's a path here to humongous dollar bills. And if we can use it in the right place against competitors, that's great for us. And they know how to do it, and they're doing it really quite well. And I think the opposite in startups, they're behaving worse because I think there's an obvious emerging anti-pattern, which is just open core as a business model sucks. And it creates really inefficient, terrible businesses. And so they're behaving badly because they're building really inefficient businesses that they're struggling to monetize in the way that they need to. And so then they have to relicense. And like, anyway.
Well, and so there also seems to be.
I want to pull this out maybe into like a more general thing quickly, because I think we are not going to dive into a talk about antitrust, which we're like dangerously close to. But the thing I would say is like the question here is like, what is the value of open source? And I think a lot of companies that you're seeing behave better, and like why you're seeing especially 501c6 open source foundations work really well, is the value of open source for them was the ability to collaborate like legally together and kind of like band together as like a little fish banding together to be a big fish to play against other big fishes. I think startups are behaving less well in this situation. One, because I don't think they've figured out what the value of open source for them is. And this collaboration element isn't, I think, as valuable for them at their stage and size.
Yes, right. The collaboration, I mean, that's a very good point, that the collaboration appeal of open source is pretty minimal. I mean, when you are building a product, and I think, I mean, all three of us are founders of companies that have open source is a very important part of all three of our companies. Mm-hmm. But we are building products that are somewhat orthogonal to the. I mean, the software is a very important part. Obviously, it's the important part. But we are not looking. And speaking for Oxide, and actually maybe Adam speak for System Initiative and Ashley for Axo, but we're not looking to the community to be like, hey, boy, can someone come help us and engage with us on this thing that we need to do, you know, to ship a product. So the collaboration angle is not as important to us in terms of like, why do we open source things? I mean, for us, it's about it's all these other benefits. It's all about the transparency that we offer our customers and so on, and their ability to get confidence in what we're actually delivering to them. So yeah, you're right, Ashley, that it's like the motivations are really different when you're at a smaller scale. And I do think that these companies are pretty confused about, why am I open source? And I mean, I think like look, bluntly, I think that, you know, and I mentioned HashiCorp explicitly in the talk. I think that Hashi is representative of a breed of companies that believes we actually would be just as successful. In fact, we'd be more successful now if we had been under a non-open source license from the beginning. And
yeah, which is insane, right? Like
insane.
It's an insane thing to believe.
That's an insane thing to believe.
It's an insane thing to believe. Yeah. The loop there is interesting, because I think what happens is there's a lift that happens in open source. So whether it's the collaboration piece of it or not, like one thing that happens when other people start to get value in whatever way they get that value. So maybe they start a business, maybe they use it in their own, maybe however it is, right? Like when they start to get value from a technology, that technology spreads because they start talking about it. They start saying, hey, this thing gives me value. And then other people start to also use it and see similar pieces of value. And like that, it goes out into the world. That lift is very difficult to measure. You can't look at it on a spreadsheet and be like, oh, what's happening is this lift. There's this surge that's happening, and it's providing this force that we can't really articulate or measure. And when you get to the size of like a HashiCorp, there is a thing you can measure, which is deals won and lost, right? Like how we had an opportunity that was with this company. They decided not to pay us. Why didn't they pay us? Well, they didn't have to pay us. Why didn't they have to pay us? Well, we gave the product away for $0. Because we open sourced our product, not the technology. And so, like, I think the anti-pattern here is that you open sourced your product. That was dumb. You shouldn't give your product away for free. I'm not going to give mine away for free. Like, I build a product and I'm selling it for money. I'm pretty sure you're not going to give me an Oxide rack for free, right? Like, you could open source all the software that makes Oxide, but it doesn't mean I get Oxide, because like in the end I gotta like buy a rack, and like that's actually the thing. And so what you get with companies like HashiCorp, or everybody that's sort of done this maneuver, is that they're actually just making a very rational decision, looking at the data that they have and going, do we still care about that lift? And like the answer is no. They don't care about that lift, because it's big enough now. The engine's large enough that like if they can squeeze some dollars out of the people who never paid them money, that's a much easier way to goose their revenue line than actually like winning new people against the same competitive headwinds that they already had. Like of course they chose to switch.
But so yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
I guess I was going to say, one of the things that I think is interesting as somebody, again, who's more of a baby, perhaps both in the startup world and in the open source world, is I think it makes perfect sense to say, hey, if you want to make a business, don't give your product away for free. I think the trick is that a lot of times people don't know what their product is yet.
Yes.
And so One of the things, like, there's this lift from marketing that you get, and that's like kind of the use open source as marketing thing. But one of the things that I've personally found, and like when I went to start a company, I almost felt like I couldn't do it non-open source, is you're not finding product market fit while you're doing stuff that's open source, but you are finding out what problems people really, really want to solve. And many people start companies without a completely clear idea exactly what their product will be, but they have a general sense of like, okay, I want to go solve problems in this area. And so I do think we're also seeing a large, like a bunch of companies coming of age that figured out what problem was worth solving in open source, but then they were able to make that discovery because they gave that thing away for free. And now they have to figure out how to claw it back. And so part of the question also, I think, for companies that want to do open source is there a way to do that discovery, like that community open-based discovery, in a way that's not open source? I mean, so that you don't end up really in Hashi. Of course there is. Of course there is.
Like when you have a proprietary business, you still set the terms for how people can consume what you do. You can just set the price at $0. Just say, like, yeah, there's this technology I open source. There's this product I produce. My product I produce right now, I'm giving it away for free. And then later you can be like, I'm going to charge you money for my product. Now, that's not the same as relicensing the software, right? Like the software is a separate thing from your product, and we conflate the two. And because we conflate them, we cause a whole lot of interesting problems. But like, there's nothing that stops us from setting the terms in whatever way we want to for how we want our products to go into the world, even while we're doing discovery. Like,
I guess the thing I would say there though is developers respond to rug pulling a freemium model the same way as they respond to the relicensing.
Yeah, but it's only a rug pull if what you're saying, if you're not saying from the beginning that my intent is to discover a product that I'm going to build for money. It's not a rug pull if you say, like to Bryan's social contract, if you have a social contract that says this is what I'm going to do, that's not a rug pull.
But I would say, and no, I feel strongly about this. I would say it's why I think that Node makes the mistake of exposing internals and saying, don't rely on these are private. And instead, I much prefer a Rust release strategy, which says, if we release it, it's stable. People don't read the docs. People are never going to remember that stuff. So if it's out there and you give it for one thing, like it is not formally a rug pull in like a strict sense, but I think it ends up having the same impact.
It's like emotionally a rug pull.
I think Ashley, she's already writing like the message. This is not a rug pull in the formal sense.
Look, here's the thing. Like, why we don't talk enough about why it is that people participate in open source. We talk about there's like this open source. There's the open source is good for open sourciness. And then there's business, and we try to make those two things separate. And it's a mistake. I'm not doing open source in my business because I like open source. I love open source. If I was rich enough to not have to bother to ever earn $1 again, I'd be doing it all day. It'd be so good. I'm doing it because I need to make fucking money. Yeah, that's why I'm here. It's the only reason I'm doing it. And if I say so clearly, and I say, look, I've open sourced all this software because I'm going to make money on top of it. Here's how. Like, you can just say it. It's not a rug pull. And like, what we've done instead is we've created all of these complex models where we say, hey, let's go try to. This is why these companies are struggling to do it, because we've tied ourselves up in knots about what the like correctest way to do it is. And I think the correctest way to do it is to just be honest about like why we're here and what we're doing. And instead we actually kind of lie to people. We go out and we're like, it's open source because we want to collaborate and it's all hugs and kisses. And then you're like, oh, until I get to 150 million in ARR and the economy goes down a little bit and it's too hard to make 20% on 150 million, because that's actually a big nut, way bigger nut than it was when I was growing 20% year over year. And like now we're not friends and it's not hugs and kisses.
But here's the thing, I don't think entrepreneurs started this though, because I think one of the
we totally did.
No, because I think most people who are individuals operate in open source to make themselves valuable to make money. I don't think most people participating in open source are doing it for hugs and kisses. I think people recognize that it is a career move. And that is what we do not talk about enough.
I'll buy that too. Like, I don't care what your motivation is, as long as I know what it is. I'm in. I just want to know what they are.
Oh, but see, but that's the thing, is the game of saying that and not saying that like started like, I think really early on in open source.
So,
and then those people who are doing that with individual projects started companies.
Sure.
In the spirit of that kind of candor of like, look, this is the business I'm going to go build. I do feel that like open source serves as a check. I mean, in terms of like why is a customer attracted to open source? Why is a user attracted to open source? It is because of investment protection. Like I am going to buy your product and the support and services that come around that. But the fact that elements of it are open source it is ultimately going to serve as a check on your rapaciousness. Because I think one thing that we have kind of forgotten, proprietary software companies, strictly proprietary software companies, are deeply ugly from a.
I don't think it's a check on your rapaciousness. Red Hat's making a ton of money. Like Red Hat is rapacious.
I'm not talking. Red Hat is not what I'm talking about. When we talk about like,
but it's not a check on your rapaciousness. It's not. They're as rapacious as they're as rapacious as any proprietary software company has ever been.
No, I can't believe that you have forced me. I can't believe that I'm being forced to defend Red Hat right now. But I say Red Hat.
I love their principles, but it is rapacious.
No, it is not. No, it is not. No, rapaciousness is Oracle. Rapaciousness is Cadence. No, I'm serious. Like those guys are absolutely next level. Like if you have to deal with, I mean, if you are an Oracle customer or you are a Cadence customer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, and they make Red Hat. I mean, they have like worlds
they're not as
of rapaciousness
they're not as
that
mean.
Red Hat is not even aware exist.
They're not as mean, but Red Hat has figured out a way to make money in a way that like it is about making money.
I guess I want to call out. I'm going to interrupt briefly here because I think for folks who don't know what rapacious means, like greediness, appearance of greediness, important because we've said like 20 times and we have not defined it. But two, again,
this is why I'm telling you they're rapacious. Red Hat's greedy. Red Hat wants the ducat. That's what they're for. They do it in a kinder, gentler way, but they want every bit as much as Oracle does.
To not look greedy. I wonder, like a lot of this is posturing.
They figured out how to not look greedy, but they're plenty greedy.
And so you said
they're just nicer about it.
And that's true, but there's a big difference between someone who's mean and someone who's a sociopath. And true.
Sure, man. I'll grant you that I'd rather hang out with Red Hat than Oracle, and that Oracle is like sociopathic in a way that Red Hat's not. I'll granted. And also,
so that's a victory though. Like that is a victory for open source that we've like notched folks down.
100%. I'd rather have more Red Hats than Oracles, and also that it's about the almighty dollar.
Do you think?
Yes, I think open source definitely. Yes.
100%.
Are you sure it hasn't just sublimated the greediness? The idea that
for those who have not been
levels of greediness is fascinating to me.
So it didn't change the level of greediness. It didn't. It's every ounce as greedy as it ever was. The difference is the recognition that if you that the lift that comes from being open creates more opportunity for more greed. Red Hat made $1 billion in ARR on Kubernetes. Nobody else does. They're the only like why? That's insane. And like it's because they're greedy and they figured out how to use that lift.
Tim is realizing that P99 is going to turn it like, okay, wait a minute, we've got to like, he's just going to go for another.
Yeah, look, I hate to do this, guys, because we do have the rest of the show to run. This is such a good conversation. Big thank you, Bryan. For what you just did there. I guess Ashley, hearing about the baby Ashley dreams, that was awesome as well. And Adam, you just get the conversation going. So I'm actually lost. Where am I? Yeah, there we go. I've got my notes up. Thanks again, guys. I feel really privileged having sat on the sidelines here and listening to that discussion. And Bryan, 10 years is a long time in tech. So let's see, what happens in another 10 years if we're still having this conversation about open source. So thanks again, Bryan, and your couple of mates. Really appreciate you being online.